Welcome to Women Who Protect, a series within the Ontic Protective Intelligence podcast. In a profession largely dominated by men, we spotlight women working in a wide range of positions within security, protection, and law enforcement. We'll hear their stories, discuss their accomplishments, and get their advice for women and girls who may be interested in a career in protection or security. I'm Dr. Marisa Randazzo with Ontic's Center for Connected Intelligence. After nearly 3 decades of experience working in security and protection, first at the U.S. Secret Service, and then in the private sector, providing security guidance to corporations, educational institutions, and high-profile individuals, I know firsthand the immense value that women bring to this field, and I know the challenges that we face. I look forward to sharing the stories of women who protect and hope they inspire other women and girls to join our ranks. Now, on to the podcast. Anna Lepingwell is the Vice President of Global Operations at Exlog. Anna has extensive experience in various roles related to global operations, risk services, crisis management, and security operations. Having worked with and at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, also known as START, World Aware, and iJet International. Anna, welcome to Women Who Protect. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to start with an overview first. Tell me about what your role is at Exlog, what you currently do in the field of security.
Sure. So I'm Vice President for Global Operations at Exlog Global. So we are a small veteran-owned risk management and security company. We're based out of Jacksonville, but I am based in London, so I'm part of our European contingent.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well, not this time of year, but generally speaking, I love it. Yeah. So my role is pretty broad, I would say. I manage our global operations team, which includes our response center, which is our 24/7 capability, our broader analyst team, and then also our security partner network, which is the people who are actually doing stuff on the ground.
And you're working directly for an array of clients in support of their security needs?
That's right. So we support a wide range of clients, anywhere from Fortune 100 companies to higher education organizations. We've got some clients who are in the medical field, and then we also work with some high net worth individuals.
It's interesting because a lot of organizations have in-house security. It sounds like you're supporting security more from an external resource. The analogy I'm thinking of is that smaller companies will often use external human resources departments, external employee assistance programs. Would you say that's a sort of a correct analogy to explain the support that you provide?
Yeah, it's very similar. So we like to think of ourselves as a force multiplier. So we work very closely with our clients, whether they have an entire security department and their own teams of analysts, or if they are, in many cases, a one-person shop, or even don't have any internal security function. And then we work with their travel or their HR departments to provide the services they need. So everything we do is very customized. All of our programs are tailored to fit the needs of that specific client.
What got you into security in the first place? How did you get into this space?
By accident?
Oh, please tell me, because I would love to hear.
No, so probably not the answer you usually get. But to be completely honest, I've always been very interested in how the world works from a social and political level. I went to university and got into geopolitical analysis, international relations. Had no idea that this whole sector, even existed, which I think is true for many people. We get that a lot when people find our job recs. on the internet. And they said, we had no idea that companies like you even existed. But I ended up finding an entry-level position at the company that used to be known as iJet, which is now Crisis 24 many years later. And I really fell in love with, interestingly, the operations side of things. I was an analyst by training and found that I really liked, especially the crisis response piece of operations. I have come to think of it as applied geopolitics, right? You really have to understand all of the dynamics of a situation to be able to apply the appropriate risk mitigation.
So for our listeners who aren't familiar with operations or operations versus analysis, can you give an explanation of for the non-practitioner of what does security operations mean?
I consider operations the action element. So what do we actually need to do to protect whatever it is we're protecting, whether it's people or static assets? So that can mean transport logistics. It can be executive protection. It can look like, physical security around a facility. For us, we look at it quite broadly. So we may also consider certain aspects of training in the operations side of the house, versus the analytics side is more around the information, which should drive those operations.
So what is it that drew you to operations? You were saying as you got in the space, you came in as an analyst or with an analytic background and you were drawn to operations. What was it that you liked?
Well, I had a wonderful mentor for starters. And we did a couple of crisis responses in the team that I was working for at a very entry level that I found to be absolutely fascinating. It really made everything that I had learned seem less abstract, right? It's the so what of all of the analysis that I'd done and learned how to do. Really applying that to a real world situation.
So you actually got to see your work have an effect.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You see a result.
Are there things within your job right now or in security generally that keep you up at night? What's your current worry or what's keeping you up at night right now?
Great question. I think there are a lot of challenging dynamics in the industry right now. The thing that really keeps me up at night, given what we do and what my team does, are the unknown unknowns. So the hard to predict large crisis events. That's the 9.0 earthquake in an urban area or a surprise, quote unquote, outbreak of conflict, whether that's internal or external. We've seen a lot of these over the past few years. And they're the type of crises that will really expose any cracks that you have in your team and in your preparation. So we do a lot around preparation, but it's still one of those things of you can only prepare so much for something you can't anticipate.
And I think your point is so important about we actually have seen a lot of the unknown unknowns over the past several years. I mean, it feels like we talk about black swan events within security, meaning kind of the big event that no one could see coming or no one expected. And it almost feels like we've had multiple black swans from a geopolitical standpoint, from a individual security standpoint. How do you prepare for the unknown unknowns? Like how can you prepare yourself, your team, your ability to respond to and I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, but how do you prepare to be nimble and to be able to react in the event of a big unknown?
Yeah, so two things for us. I'd say the first is having really robust incident management processes so that you have triggers in place and you have processes for who needs to be woken up, right? What are the first steps that on-call person needs to take to start to gather information, activate resources, safeguard people? So we have, very simple to follow checklists and plans that are pretty agnostic to the situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one piece of it. And the other piece is being constantly in an operations driven intel cycle. So our team is consistently watching the world and practicing all of these information gathering, analysis, and risk mitigation measures at a much less critical level, but at on a day-to-day basis. And the process is pretty much the same when it comes to a crisis. It's just all accelerated by 10 times, right? So that's what I like to tell my people. You're following the same process. You still need to you know have your intel collection plan. You need to be verifying your sources. We need to be activating the right resources and doing all of our analysis and applying that in a way that makes sense and isn't putting anyone at a greater risk. So it's the same thing as we do on a day-to-day basis, just magnified. And I think if you're constantly in a loop of practicing, and then doing after action reports on every operation that we do, that hopefully makes you resilient enough to be prepared for that black swan event.
It's interesting. I've never heard it described that way, and I find that framework actually very reassuring, because so often we hear about crisis response and people think about, that's right. We developed that crisis response plan or that emergency response plan, and it's somewhere, and I can't even remember where it is. You're
Mhm.
taking a very different framework to this, at least different from as I've heard in other organizations, or sort of another way of thinking of it, meaning you're looking at, hey, it's the same process we use for our day-to-day security operations, but faster, more urgent, or it would like, and your point is, this is the same process we're used to. So practice the process, it sounds like.
Very much so. We have a benefit at Exlog that we have enough real world scenarios that we're working through at a non crisis level that we're able to practice that. We also do drills, but I consistently preach to our clients that this is why you need to do tabletop exercises and do drills. Because if you're, like you said, just dusting off this plan that you've had on the shelf and haven't had time to look at in 18 months, there's no way that you're going to have a fully successful crisis response.
Again, it sounds like a very practical, but also workable and livable framework that you're talking about here. You're talking about building muscle memory in a way in the security space, and then just practicing your plan. We're planning the work and working the plan. And I could imagine that creates very skilled, reliable security operations and operators.
Yeah, well, we'd like to think it does. It's certainly been tried and tested a few times. But I think that muscle memory concept is super important, because when things are coming at you so quickly in a crisis, if you don't have any of that, for lack of a better term, right, muscle memory developed, you're going to be scrambling to just try to do the basics instead of applying, you know, the brain power that you need to actually solve the big problem at hand.
Well, we know that in a crisis, under adrenaline, just our ability to function in certain areas is much more diminished. I mean, we have heightened responses in some areas, but diminished capacity in others. And so, if you're building this up, so it's not, it's like the way we teach children how to respond to fire drills and in schools, we try to make it automatic. And in this day and age, unfortunately, how they respond to active shooter situations as well. But you try to make it automatic, and you're thinking less about the crisis, and you're less paralyzed by the crisis, and you're just more focused on, all right, every time I hear this fire alarm, this whatever it is, this is what I do. So I think it's really important to do this in the security space. And I don't hear about this as much. We talk about tabletop exercises, but we don't talk about kind of building that automatic, reliable reaction the way you're describing here.
Yeah, definitely.
Tell me a bit. Let me transition here for a bit. You are certainly one of the leading experts on intelligence operations. How have you seen this space evolve, if you have seen it evolved?
It definitely has. The piece that stands out to me the most in terms of, I would say, recent shifts has been around information availability. And I think you hear this from all corners. There's so much information available from so many different open sources these days. And, that's great on one level, but it's brought with it so much more mis and disinformation. And that mis and disinformation is coming from such sophisticated sources now that it's making it more and more difficult to sift through that noise and find the accurate sources, use them, analyze them. And that comes with this increased operational tempo that I think, many people talk about permacrisis and other terms around this. It seems like things are coming at us very quickly in the world. And when you bring that together with this sort of sea of questionable information, it becomes, definitely a challenging environment for Intel analysts to work within.
So how do you handle it? How have you evolved as this space has evolved?
There are a couple of things. I think one is to really stick to the basics. So we are very, I would say, strict with our source validation. So when you find new sources, there's part of the Intel cycle is validating your sources, ensuring that you're using sources that are as truthful as possible, and but also understanding the bias of the imperfect sources, because you're not going to have a roster of perfect, unbiased, valid sources. It just, in many situations, doesn't exist. So learning how to work within bias, it's something that all analysts should be trained on, and we're big on that. And it's another thing that becomes standard. You do it for everything that you do. And then the idea there is that it becomes just an absolute habit. You're going to verify all the sources you use. You're going to go through that process and try to counteract, that mis and disinformation. But it is time consuming. I will say that. And I think that's where using some tools can come in handy to try to offset some of the added time that's, put into trying to validate sources. That time can be offset by tools in some other ways.
Tools and has technology played a role here in helping?
It definitely. It's both a blessing and a curse, I think. Right? It can be an incredible force multiplier and can definitely take some time-consuming manual processes and cut them way down, which is where we try to, put our tools is what are we spending a lot of time on that actually doesn't necessarily need to be a human process, that then gives the analysts more time to do the important thinking work that AI cannot do yet, right?
Getting to that so what that you need for that particular client, I can imagine. Tell me about how you see it as a curse, because I think I know where you're going, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
I think there's a bit of a danger in becoming too dependent on the tools, and then you start undervaluing the human in the loop piece.
Yes.
You can also see tools become a single point of failure a lot of times. We see that on the client side. I see that in other organizations where you see just one thing that could break down. And that in many cases, those teams have lost the capability to do their jobs without those tools.
Well, and I was thinking about it from a different angle too, as someone who's been in the security space myself for 30 years now, that some tools are hard to learn for those of us not used to relying on technology for everything and used to sort of doing the more of the basics by hand or boots on the ground, as you were talking about before, that that tools that are easy to use can be helpful. Tools that are harder to use can actually create an obstacle for that increased operational tempo that you were talking about as well.
That's definitely true. And there are some tools out there that are more user-friendly than others. And it does take time for the analysts to really become subject matter experts in using them to the point where they aren't time sink.
We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about Ontic's Center for Connected Intelligence. In the world of safety, security, and protection, we know that sharing information is crucial. That's why we created the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. The center is a hub for the ongoing exchange of security strategies and best practices, insights on current and past trends, and sharing valuable information through expert discussion and analysis. It's made up of subject matter experts with decades of experience across a wide range of disciplines. To find blogs, podcasts, webinars, white papers, and more, check out the center by visiting ontic.co/center. That's ontic.co/center. I've got a question too about the interactions and communication between analysts and those doing the operational work. Have you seen ways that communication can be helpful, strategies that you've seen have worked? The analysts do such vital work, but it has to get to the operators to make a difference. What have you seen in terms of that communication, tools, technology, anything like that helps to bridge that connection between analyst and operator?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite soapboxes. So thank you.
I love it.
So we run very much an integrated operations and intel model, which has its own challenges, but has been very beneficial for us. So that means operations drives intelligence, right? So what we need to accomplish for the client drives the intelligence collection plans and the requirements on that side. And the teams work very, very closely together on a day-to-day basis. So at our entry level, they are trained to do not necessarily the boots on the ground piece of the operations, but the task planning. They learn how to do sort of anything desk side that you can do operationally, as well as the analytic components, so that they're trained as generalists and they understand both sides of the game.
So I love that. So they actually are, it almost seems like they are more active participants than we often see some analyst positions.
Very much so. And I think it makes the analysts better. And I've really seen them blossom in this, where it's not just write a document, send it off, and hope that it does something somewhere, but they are on the calls with the clients. They are participating in operational planning. When we have a crisis response, we have our analysts in the mix, and they are, part of that incident response team.
Wow.
So I think that that's really vital. And when you're not doing that, firstly, you have the potential for the communications breakdowns that you were talking about. But you're also losing out on some, potential real expertise on the analyst side as well, right? And you kind of create that rift, which you see a lot in the industry.
But here you're actually like they're part of, in a way, it sounds like they are actually part of the operational team. They are not on the ground, but yet it sounds like they are in the meetings, in the crisis briefings, part of really woven in to be part of the team. And I just see tremendous advantages. You're describing this because they get to do better analytical work, because that they get to know and maybe even anticipate, I could imagine, the needs of the client as a as a daily operation is unfolding, or as a crisis evolves as well.
Exactly right. And it gives both sides, I would say, a deeper mutual respect as well, where the operators aren't brushing off the intel input as much, right? Which you kind of sometimes see. And at the same time, our analysts have a deep respect for what the people on the ground are having to do, because they're actually seeing the operational planning stages. They're seeing the sit reps come through and the challenges and, changing routes, whatever it is. They're understanding that it's not just, I'm going to sit here and write a high level treatise on, the Ukrainian conflict, for example, but my teams actually need to know which roads are blocked off and who's blocking them and what are the dynamics there and how are those dynamics likely to change, right? And it changes their mentality around intel collection.
I'm fascinated by this because it really sounds like, it sounds like it helps to address a shortcoming or frustration I've often heard from analysts about feeling like I don't know where my information goes. I don't know how it's used. The way you've got it structured, they're on a ride along, right? Or they're there even if they're not actually there doing the operational work. I can imagine for that would be make that position and make that analytic support mechanism or analytic expertise particularly gratifying to work in that and from that angle too.
I think it does. Yeah. A ride along is a good way to sort of think about that. And we do some more traditional, I would say, analytic products too, where we'll do a strategic brief or a comparative analysis for different regions of the country. And that gets sent off. And sometimes the analysts do come back and say, doing this compared to some of the more, tactical supporting work they do, like it feels like screaming into the void.
What advice do you have for women and girls, for anyone who wants to get into the security space? What have you learned along the way, or what advice could you share about people who may want to get into this area?
I have a few, and I realized as I was coming up with these that they're not necessarily specific to women and girls, but I still think that they're very important. So, my first one is that no one succeeds in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is everyone needs a professional support structure. So, not just, mentorship, which is very important, but having good teammates that you can talk to and bounce ideas off of and uh, you know, where you mutually make each other stronger. I think that's something that's sometimes a little bit overlooked or undervalued. And it's hugely important. The number of people I've had come to me and be like, I can't figure this out on my own, or I feel like I'm lost in this problem set. And I've said, well, who have you talked to about it? Right? Have you reached out? Have you, talked to the other smart people on our team? And I think that there's a bit of this perception that doing so makes you weaker in some way. That we look out and we see these people who are, massively successful, and we think that they've just done that all on their own. And I think I've come to understand more and more that nobody's doing it all on their own. I'm not doing it on my own, certainly. And I think coming to that realization that you need to have other smart people to talk to collaborate with, as well as more formal mentors. That goes a long way.
Oh, I love that. Security is a team sport because it's so true.
Yeah, I think one of them is understand that there are so many different paths you can take. Mine was certainly not standard, and it was not the path that I had sort of intended on when I was finishing graduate school. But I love it. And I'm super happy with the direction that my career has taken me. So I would say, maintain an open mind, be willing to explore different aspects of security, or even, pieces of the industry that are maybe somewhat peripheral, right? If you're interested in the psychological aspect of profiling, for example, get into that, get nerdy about that. Right? Go on some
I
professional
love it.
tangents. I think that that's okay to do. And you don't always need to take that straight arrow path.
But I think you're absolutely right that that you don't have to have a direct path to a successful security career, and you can build expertise through other positions along the way.
Yeah. And I think the opportunities to learn new things, I would be very open to them. So, it might be something completely random or something where you don't think that it has immediate applicability. Go out there and learn it. It might give you a nugget that you will, use further down in your career path. Or it might open doors that you haven't even considered. So just be really open to learning experiences.
I love that. Last question around getting into the field of security. Are there any particular majors, graduate programs or degrees or professional associations that you found helpful along the way and or sort of focal points that you found beneficial for your security career?
I'm not going to name any specific ones, but I think there are green flags to look for in graduate programs and certifications. So I did a graduate program that was much more policy focused than academically focused.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to write a lot more in sort of short policy briefing format. And I found that to be much more practical and applicable to, what I do now. The ability to write a long academic paper is great and it's admirable. But we get a lot of people who are straight out of university and they have to almost relearn how to write. So I would say when you're looking for a program, have your end goal in mind. And I'd ask yourself as you're, putting together your program and your classes and everything else, does this have an application? And maybe it's not a super exact application, but, am I learning a skill that has some kind of practical application for me? Am I learning how to think? Am I learning how to write? Am I learning how to, verbally brief in a way that is productive?
Yeah, no, and getting back to something you said at the beginning, learning how to make that so what determination.
Yes.
To give that fast analysis, as you're describing, it sounds can be even more important than being able to write that lengthy treatise on a particular subject.
It's the bottom line up front, the bluff, right? If you're waking up your boss in the middle of the night because a bomb has gone off somewhere, you want to be able to explain that situation in 2 to 3 sentences.
Yeah. Especially if you've made that decision to wake them up.
Right.
Anything else that we haven't had a chance to talk about that you wanted to delve into?
I think just one last point when we're talking about people who are looking to get into the industry is mentorship, which I touched on a little bit, is so important. Whether it's a formal mentorship program or it's informal, I've benefited so much from my mentors. That's been something that I'm very grateful for. And I think at almost any level in your career, you can also start giving back in terms of the mentorship. And doing so has made me reflect on, my professional goals and, problem solving and other things. Actually, mentoring other people is a massive area for professional growth as well. So I would say don't shy away from it.
I love that guidance, especially because I haven't heard it talked about before, that mentoring other people, A, can start at any point in your career, and B, it can actually benefit the mentor as well as the mentee. It can, and as you've described, really can help increase your own reflectiveness on your career. That's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I really hope I get a chance to meet you in person at some point really soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great, and I'm sure we'll be able to connect.
This episode was brought to you by the ONTIC Center for Connected Intelligence. Learn more at ontic.co/center. Again, that's ontic.co/center. It was produced by AJ McKeon. Our music is a track called Roll the Dice and was written by Mark Wallach. Please remember to rate and review our podcast on iTunes and subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions, we'd love to hear them. You can reach us at podcast@ontic.co or visit ontic.co/center for more information. I'm Dr. Marisa Randazzo. Thanks for listening.